We are ready to begin. Welcome to Write What Scares You. My name is Liz Reed. I am one part of the art duo Cuddles and Rage, and also the co-author and artist of the Tales from the Crypt meets Food graphic novel, Bites of Terror. If you don't mind just going down the line.
Hey, everybody.
Pause for applause.
Hey, everyone. My name is McLeod Chapman, and I am the author of a few books out there. Most recently, I wrote a spooky book called The Remaking, another book called Whisper Down the Lane, and this September, I have a new novel coming out called Ghost Eaters, which will come out in September. And I also write comic books, so this is a comic book.
And also great reviews for those readers.
Yeah, so far so good. Thanks for coming out.
I'm Alex Johnson. I write dark fantasy and weird fiction, since we're on the fringes of all things horror. I have published over 40 short stories, some of which are collected into 2 short story collections. One was a finalist for World Fantasy, one was longest for the Stouffer Award. I'm also the author of the queer gothic novella quartet, Chasing Daniels, and my current project is what my friend helpfully calls The Vampire War and Peace. I am serializing it right now, but the first prequel is out. So, thank you.
And the super fun thing about this panel is that our friends at Fangoria sent us a ton of stuff to give away, along with our authors are also giving away their books. So the way this panel is going to work is that we're going to have a discussion about horror and writing, which I'll lead, and then towards the end, where it's 15 to 20 minutes, we'll have a Q&A. And if you ask a question, then you get to come up afterwards, so you're not being awkward, and win something from Fangoria or a book. And so we'll put it all together. So definitely stay until the end. And just more thank you, Fangoria. They're very, really good about supporting creators, so we appreciate them looking out for us at AwesomeCon. So let's get started. This is a panel where, I love talking to authors about it because the answer always comes up different, and it can go to weird spaces. So with the theme of Write What Scares You, I just want to start off with not so much the what scares you, because, it's so different to everybody, but what exactly does Write What Scares You mean to you?
Okay. So, it's interesting because for the last book I wrote, which is Whisper Down the Lane, which was all about the satanic panic era of the 70s, 80s, early-ish 90s. I don't know if you were aware of the satanic panic, but this was an amazing moment in history where folks in our lovely country believed that there was a hidden underground network of devil worshippers operating throughout the school system here. So your kindergarten teacher was in fact a devil worshiper. And this, we can laugh about it, but people believe this. And it was, most famously, there was the McMartin school trial, which happened in California, where for over 10 years, this, there was a protracted court trial where these teachers, these administrators for this daycare were basically on trial for being devil worshippers, even though there was no evidence for this ever happening. So to answer your question, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I was a child of the 80s, and I was told to beware of the van with no windows, kind of patrolling the neighborhood, and never take candy from strangers because there might be a razor blade in there. And that kind of urban legend became the kind of thing that I, as a child, you'd be like, I can't. No, you're gonna kidnap me, and there's it just baked its way into the DNA of our neighborhood existence. So that scared me. And now, as an adult, as a parent, I have 2 boys, and every day I send them out to the world, and it's absolutely terrifying. I am casting my children in the horror movie of my mind, my imagination, where like every day I'm like, they're going to get kidnapped, they're going to succumb to some illness, they are going to, melt because of the climate, and like, it is absolutely horrifying. So I guess to answer your question, forgive me for this ramble. It's both the kind of what scared me as a child and what scares me as a parent, and kind of like basically writing about, like, putting a little skin in the game. Like, frankly, like, just saying, like, this is what terrifies me, and hoping, praying that there's that kind of commonality. Like, we always talk about, like, write what you know. I think if I could have gone and, like, hopped into a time machine and, like, go back to that 5th grade teacher who said, write what you know, and instead say, write what you feel, you have this kind of common emotional content. You have that thing that kind of connects us together. Like, this is what we're afraid of, or this is, I feel this, and maybe one of you does as well, and we can connect on that emotional level. Writing about what scares you, writing about that emotion, maybe clowns don't scare you, but maybe they do, and like that's the thing that we can kind of, that's what brings us together, the things that we're afraid of.
Oh, this is terrifying. This is great. Ellis?
So I guess I write about two kinds of things that scare me. One is that I write a lot of body horror. As a person who's never been 100% comfortable in her female-coded body, it's been a way for me to explore those emotions and also connect with other people. The tag phrase on my banner at my booth says unnatural fiction, in part because through history so much about female bodies has been described as unnatural, female behavior has been described as unnatural, and that's one of the things I explore. But I'm also a child of the 70s and 80s. And again, as a person with a female body, I was especially drummed into me that I just had to fear the world, right? The world was a place of violence. It was a place where especially men were out to get me at any point. I could not trust them. And so I write about that as well. And I think a part of it is to, again, find that common ground, like Clay was talking about it, but it's also writing my way through it. And trying to find ways to kind of safely explore my conflicting emotions, my desire for independence, this fear that was drummed into me. Horror, I think, creates a real safe space for emotional exploration and catharsis, especially kind of a shared catharsis. And it also can help us teach. It can help teach how to fight monsters, right? It can help teach how to fight your fears. It can give you strategies for surviving and even coming out stronger on the other side. So I think writing what scares me is a way for me to get through my fears and hopefully bring other people on the journey with me. We can all get to the other side together somehow.
And I'll say for myself, I was a little kid who was scared of everything. I was so scared of things that, like, even in high school, I would still, like, sleep in my mom's bedroom. And then, of course, she'd put on Tales from the Crypt, and I'd be like, why? So I've grown up with, like, a lot of anxiety. But I also came from a family where, we had a lot of humor. And so that's what I like to do with my horror, is to, take emotional things, like Clay was talking about, that scare me, but then also add humor in them. And that's what I think is beautiful about the horror genre, is that it really is something that can transcend every other genre, where it's like a comedy, a horror comedy, or drama, or romance, which I think we need more of, horror romance, just saying. So I think it's really all about, thank you for clapping, I saw you. I think it's all about, what you want it to be for you, and that emotion, and also, so much of us go back to our childhood, and, there's a lot to pull from there, where, you don't have to pay somebody $120 an hour for it. You can just, write about it. I do all.
Writing is very therapeutic.
Yeah.
No, it is amazing. It is cathartic on both levels, of both the writing and the reading. Like, I feel like there's something to be said about exorcising one's personal, traumas, personal demons onto the page, but then to be on the receiving end of that, to be the reader, like, there's like such an open communication there between the author, the narrator of the story to then be like, I feel this too, or you're creating kind of that safe space in order to either kind of experience the fear. We always talk about the roller coaster ride. That when you watch a movie or you read a book, it's a roller coaster ride, but it's safe because it's within a contained experiential temporal environment. But a book, it's so much more intimate, and you're meeting the author halfway, and like inhabiting your imagination kind of inhabits the space of this text, and it's almost like it's more personal. I think that's the kind of key difference between like watching a movie versus reading a book. When you read a book, you are inhabiting the world that has been kind of like designed by these writers, and I don't know, like it feels much more of a intimate conversation between the reader and the author.
Right. And I think that, with a lot of themes on history, things we have like all these zombies and, vampires are hot for a bit and the witches. How do you take that and, first off, make it your own, but also, I feel like so many people, I know I struggle with this for me, how do you, or is it even important to take a monster and make it be your metaphor? Or decide to just, I just want to have fun with this. I don't want people to walk away with the message. I want them to just have a good time. Like, how do you balance that?
Well, I feel like that distinction kind of doesn't work for me, because I feel like it's, like, I think, a good story kind of does both, right? It can speak to you, should entertain, but it can also convey something about your worldview, about what you're trying to say. I'm always leery of people who say they just want to entertain. I feel that is also a political stance in and of itself, right? The idea that I'm not connected to politics is just fun. But I write about, I do like the idea of making the metaphors literal and exploring them and then following through. I think we say a lot of things casually, and I like to say, well, what happens if it's actually real? What does that look like? And how does that play out in a real world space? I also just like blood. And so, and so that's why it's like me and vampires. I basically started that series because I wanted to write dangerous liaisons with a lot of blood. So, and I think that's fine too, but I'm also using it to talk a lot about history and class and race and things like that. But also, let's just have lots of blood everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially to balance out like the heavier themes, because so often, I know for me, like if I feel like something's being shoved in my face, then I'm going to pull away from it. I want you to let me experience it versus tell me.
I love the kind of elasticity of certain monsters. Like I love that like every generation has a new kind of zombie story that kind of defines that generation. And the same with like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We're gifted the kind of like the story for our times. My new book, Ghost Eaters, it's all about a haunted drug. So you pop a pill, you see the dead, and it's kind of cool at first, like, oh my gosh, all the ghosts are in this room, and you didn't know that, did you, until you took this drug. But then, like, once you start seeing the dead can see you, and they don't necessarily like to be seen as much. And but it was, the kind of basis for the story was, I love haunted house stories. Like anytime you give me a Shirley Jackson Shelley, I just want it. Like I want to eat it. I want to I've always lived in that castle. And it feels like what is a new way to kind of look at what it's like to be haunted. Like I love the idea of I asked this silly question one day. It was like, we've had haunted houses, we've had haunted dolls, we've had haunted tennis shoes, haunted bubble gum. What is the nature of what is it to be haunted? And just asking that very kind of simple question of what's it like? What does it feel like to be haunted? And that was the kind of aperture into this larger metaphor of addiction, of grief, of I wanted to take, there is that moment where it's what is the stamp that I'm gonna put on this? Like, what is my zombie story? What's my vampire story? And I wanted to tell a ghost story, but then I wanted to kind of like figure out what were the kind of terrain, what was the terrain of the ghost story, the haunted house story, and how could you maybe explore a kind of further reach of it? So I said, let's take the haunted house motif, but put it in a pill, and then use that as a vehicle to kind of ask bigger questions, certain questions, personal questions, like what is it, you know, for me, and you know, not to open up the can of worms, but like I lost a friend to addiction, and that, like, I wanted to talk about that. Like I didn't know how to process that, how to explore it, how to, like, you know, articulate it, and it, like the just asking the question, almost like using the metaphor as a way in which to kind of exercise these things. And it was great. And it, you know, that the personal stuff isn't the story, but it was the kind of the thing I needed in which to tell the story. It led me to the story.
You know, if somebody can come up to me and explain to me the metaphor and the R.L. Stein story where there's a haunted sponge, I will absolutely give you something from Fangoria.
Like, consumerism. It's all about consumerism.
Whatever. I mean, R.L. Stein even said himself that, like, you know, he just writes, just cranks it out. So, you know, he's like, whatever, everybody can write horror, you know. He has a very interesting, a little bit of a grumpy man, but he's very successful.
Now I want to write an essay deconstructing R.L. Stein.
Oh, yes. I'll give you my first one. You know, one thing that I get a lot when people come up to us and talk about, like, being a writer in horror specifically is they'll come to you and they'll, like, pitch their story to you. And I think one of the interesting things, especially with, you know, science fiction and the crossover, is that you're bringing people into a unique world that they haven't experienced before most of the time. You know, it's a little bit easier in a drama, you know, to make it relatable because it might be somebody's gone through. So how do you take what could be on paper a very complicated concept and break it down into, you know, possibly an elevator pitch for either an editor, an agent, or even a friend to really understand?
Okay, go first.
Yeah, no pressure.
Oh, no. So, actually, I have an answer for this. So, what I have learned is that, so this is for elevator pitches. This isn't for, like, querying or trying to sell the full book or series. This is just to, you know, that exchange of, like, you know, getting someone to buy your book, getting someone to buy your concept. People don't really want to know the plot so much as the experience, the emotional experience of the story. What kind of ride is it? That's why people push A+B pitching so much, you know, it's Avengers plus blood or whatever, because everything plus blood, because it's the experience. If you say Avengers and people think found families and, you know, teamwork and fighting huge villains and things like that. So you're giving them a sense of what the emotional, the feels are going to be of your story. And that is been, you know, 10 times more effective than just trying to say, well, these are the 3 major things that happen in my stand.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you feel like talking about character, like who is your surrogate, like the kind of reader, kind of like who's going to take the reader's hand in a situation like that? It
depends on how much time I have to pitch, but honestly, if it truly is like an elevator pitch, like 10 seconds or so, I am really just looking to nail the experience. Like I pitch, you know, if you have stopped at my table at all this weekend, you have heard me say my Gothic novella quartet is Lovecraft meets Jane Austen. That's it. And it works, right? It gets us, like, people can instantly put those 2 things together and they have an idea of what the story is going to be like. It's not set in the Regency, it's set in Georgian, it's Lovecraft only in that there's tentacles in it, but it's an instant sort of gateway, and that's enough to get people to say, oh, tell me more, if those are 2 experiences they want to have.
And kind of transitioning into, different mediums for telling horror, I feel like having Clay here, I just have to ask him this question, because Clay has written horror in the podcast format, the movie format, in prose and in comics. And I feel like if you're coming to Comic-Con, then you probably tap into one of those sections and not just writing a really long novel. So how do you treat horror differently in all those mediums? Because they hit different senses.
That's a good question. I mean, when I'm writing novels, it's me kind of scraping at the head cheese of my own skull and just kind of like being kind of alone and kind of losing myself in a book, and then knowing at a certain point there will be a engagement and collaboration with readers, editors, but for a large chunk of it, it's just me, eating my fingers. But then with comics and film writing, like there's this kind of, the engagement is different, and I know that like the collaborative effort is far more kind of open. So there's more of a kind of dynamic or a communication between me and the filmmaker, the director, the artist, the inker, the penciler. Like there's more people kind of involved within the kind of the development or the genesis of the project. So it allows me as either the storyteller or the writer or the designer of the architect of the story to say, what do you think about this? Where when it's writing a book, it's just kind of like, I let the story kind of dictate what medium it wants to be.
Sure.
Where I know that this wants to be a novel. And, I know that this wants to be a short story, or I know that this wants to be a comic or a screenplay. And sometimes they overlap, sometimes they become, like, they evolve from one thing to the next. But, like, asking the question up front, like, how best to let this story kind of tell itself? Like, how does this story want to manifest itself? And, I think that's kind of, that kind of
I see your writing room, I can see you.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I'm gonna throw out one more question to our panelists, and then throw it out to you guys. So come with questions, and like I said, if you ask us a question, then afterwards you can come out and pick out some goodies. Honey and I, we did a virtual Fangoria panel that was with a bunch of other horror writers, and one of my favorite questions that I asked of them was just kind of about how to end a book. Because I think that, we were talking before this, all of us were having coffee, and like you were telling us about a movie, and we also had a movie, where it started out really good, and then it kind of wanes towards the end. And I think that, any genre that you're writing, you've got to land your ending, because I think that's what gets people to recommend your book, and that's what keeps your momentum as a writer going forward. And the reason why I mentioned that Fangoria virtual panel, which, if you follow us on here, we will have creative links to it on our social, is that we had Paul Tremblay on there, and my favorite question was asked, like, your endings are so ambiguous, and everybody comes up to you and they're like, kind of give them their idea of like how it ends, and, but yet he's made, his career out of that. And so you don't always have to have an answer. And so it's just mind-boggling to me, because I feel like I need to have a perfect little bow. So how do you guys feel about, landing that ending? How do you do it? How important is it?
If you haven't read Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts, you must. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I mean, all of his books are, but I feel like that's the gateway book for him. As someone who has never stuck the landing of my books, I feel like I don't know if I have the best answer for this, but yes, you want that moment where it's like the reader reaches the end and then they put the book down and they just keep thinking about the book. And I feel like there's a tension that you want to engage with the reader, where it's like you want an ending that makes them go, oh my God, that was astounding. But I always feel like you want to end, for me personally, forgive me, but it's almost like you want to end 2 beats before that, in the Paul Tremblay way, where it's like, but wait a minute, like and it's like, and the end. and the reader's like, whoa, whoa, hold on one second. Like, what just happened? Like, there should be 2 more seconds here. It's almost like, oh my God, Inception, where no spoilers, but the thing is spinning, and you're like, and then the movie ends, and you're like, wait a minute, like that. If you just had 2 more seconds, 2 more pages, 2 more paragraphs, there would be the bow. But I feel like the bow is, I want to get rid of the bow. I want to rip the bow. The bow is the bow says everything's going to be okay. The bow is like, and they all live happily ever after. Or maybe they don't live happily.
They all die.
Yeah, but the bow is the conclusion that says you can let go now. You can leave. It's okay. Like, it's done. But if you don't have the bow and it's just gift wrap, just wrapping all around, you're just like, this is a mess. But life is messy, and like horror is messy, and I feel like not having the bow permits you as the reader an opportunity to either fill in the gaps, wrap it up for yourself, like come to a conclusion, which is a little frustrating. I get it, like, but that frustration is a certain creative relenting that the author is doing, I think intentionally, to say this is about us kind of reaching a conclusion together. What do you think? What do you think happens? Paul Tremblay is infuriating because he'll be like, hands off, I don't know, what do you think happened? And you're just like, oh, but just tell me, did they really die? Did they live happily ever after? And it's just like, I don't know, can you tell me? And it's just like, because you want it, but it's the want, it's that desire for conclusion or for resolution that means the book is going to linger just a little bit longer. It's gonna stick in your craw, and you want to stick in people's craw. That's what I think.
I am 50-50 on that. I tend not to start writing until I have an endpoint in mind, right? So it's something, because I'm not an outliner, I'm generally a discovery writer, but I like to have sort of a beacon on the hill that I'm roughly aiming towards. Even with the Vampire War and Peace, I have actually written an epilogue for the entire thing, and maybe I won't get to it before I die, who knows, but it is there, it's in a drawer, and it's sort of in the back of my head. That's where we're aiming for. I think endings, the bow, I don't usually write full bows, but depending on how long and how kind of excruciating the story's been, I do like to try to get closure, at least sort of the emotional roller coaster that we've been on. So we may not know what happens in the future, we may not be sure, but at least we have some kind of feeling of emotional closure at the end. So usually I write through it, and then I let it sit for a while, and then one of the revision questions I ask myself is, do I need everything in the ending? Because I tend to overwrite them, right? I'm also very much like, get everything on the page and then pull back. So I tend to overwrite, and so one of the questions I will ask myself is, do I need everything in this ending? And actually, I have it was a novella length. It was 18,000 words, so it's one of the hardest lengths to sell. And I wrote it last year. And about 14 months after I had finished this story, I woke up the other night at 3 in the morning. I was like, I don't think I can pull 3 paragraphs out of the ending, which will bring it back down to novelette, which changes the whole marketing plan for it and everything. But so it depends. But I think even taking the stuff out of that ending, you won't be sure what's going to happen to the main character in the future. You're not sure if she's going to survive and be happy or not, but you do have at least some closure for the emotional stuff I put her through. So that's kind of the balance I try to hit. I do find Tremblay frustrating at times. And I feel like it's also, there's a weird thing about endings with, and I don't want to get into like genre divisions, but I feel like it's something that they also teach you a lot in MFA programs, is to not go put both on things. They teach you to pull back. And so I'm wondering too if that's kind of just a strategy that's drifted down from academia as well. I'm always looking at these things and questioning them, but it really depends on the story.
But I think the best part of your answer really is like that emotional closure, because I think no matter what, even if you don't really know how it's ending, you want to know where your character is at.
Yeah. like, with the one that I'm going to take a couple paragraphs out, but a lot of editors told me is that I don't need to know how she turns out. I just want to feel that she's roughly okay at that moment. So I could feel okay being her. So that was kind of what was in the back of my head for that one.
Anything else that I'm going to take questions?
I'm just really curious with the you said exploratory writer, like
Yeah.
you discover as you go. So you have the A to B when you're writing. How circuitous is the path to B?
It depends on the story. I mean, I have written way out to the weeds and come back again. I have chopped anything from 200. I mean, sometimes I write the first draft all the way through, and it's clean and it's beautiful, and sometimes we scratch out of it. It's really just how the characters get to be.
Thank you. Question. Oh, start up front here. You guys love Fangoria, or either love asking us questions. I can't decide. But go ahead, right here.
I love vampire fiction. That's my favorite. Because as a disabled person, I see them kind of as dark superheroes. Even before superheroes became popular. So I'm also a child in the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
And I'm working on a vampire screenplay now. And I know that so much has been done with vampires. I'm like, I don't want to hit any of those pitfalls. So I didn't know if you, LS, could give me like some advice on either pitfalls to avoid or how to stay true to myself in writing my story. And I'm a discovering writer too. And I don't know if it's a woman thing.
Yeah.
Because I find that my male friends who are writers are much more focused.
I met a writer once at a convention out on the West Coast, and he plots everything, like he has a one-line synopsis for every scene in an entire novel. I was like, how do you? I don't know. So the thing about, something like a vampire or a zombie or something that has been done so much is that probably whatever you're going to put in has already been done somewhere. And so I think it comes a point where if you want to write that, then you just have to let that go and trust that your take on it and your story will be enough to make it unique to people. Because I can guarantee you that, and there will always be someone in the audience who's going to raise their hand and say, I read the story in 1984, and that's exactly what it is. And it's like, that's nice, okay, and great. So there's two of us in the world, and you just have to take it and roll with it and move on, and trust that your story is going to give enough to make it special.
Or you can say, that's why you love this book. And by the way, I love your account for.
Oh, thank you.
There's a great documentary about him. So I'm going to go in the back here with the black arm. Right? Yeah, you have time.
I'm a writer. My first audience were a bunch of little old ladies, retired ladies. And I was writing my first time to travel to work. I had to temper my language. Even though my characters typically wasn't, did not curse, it really turned out the little ladies. My first did do a bunch of other stuff. So it still tantalized them and didn't make it up, shut it down. Yet when I later read another author's book, she had no idea how to write guns. And I told her, if you present this to a bunch of military guys because I'm an army brat, you're just going to be insulting them. Professional soldier, you have to talk and act like this. And she just chewed me out and said, it's her writing, and she can write whatever she wants. How do you find that happy medium in which you can still tantalize your audience, get them engaged in the writing?
Ultimately, it's got to be your story. So I think you have to write for yourself. Not to consider the reader secondary, but you're the one who's living within the story. So I feel like you have to be. Happiness, I think, is a very elastic term. Like I'm never happy with my writing, but I enjoy the experience of it, and I'm writing the story that I want to tell. So I feel like that's the foundation. It's got to be for you. So if they curse like sailors, they got to curse like sailors. If that's the story that you want to tell. I think in terms of research, in terms of like the kind of like the detail work, no one is going to get it right. No one's going to get it exact. And I feel like you could get every detail of the specificity of the date of the gun that came out this year, that manufactured by this company, and who used it at what time. you know.
Yeah, really not the color anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like that's and there are a lot of authors who do that, and I think there are a lot of readers who appreciate that. And I kind of, my hat is off to them because I feel like when I do my research, I always get lost and I'm in the weeds with my research, and it's like, okay, so where's the story in all of this research? How do I, I feel like it ultimately always has to come back to the story. Like, what's the story you're trying to tell, and are you happy with that story? Happy, is this the story that you were wanting to tell, and can you steer it? The research is going to always come calling. You're going to be like, oh, there's that amazing detail about 1912, and that company did that thing with that rifle that never existed, and whether everyone would agree with me or not, I feel like at a certain point you have to let fact go in order to tell the story that you want to tell. And maybe it's parallel to detail work, maybe it's not, but it's close enough.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to get through all these answers.
Okay, so just quickly, because I've done a lot of historical stuff, my aim is responsibility. I've also failed history as a college student because my brain chemistry does not allow for dates. I retain no dates. I retain culture. But so what I do is I look for people who know about things that I don't know about, and I'm just aiming for plausibility. So guns, horseback riding, things like that, I would look for someone who's really experienced and just tell me, is it driving you crazy or could you roll with it? That's what I'm going for.
And also serve the story. If your story is not moving fast enough, then people are going to put it down.
Yeah, my wife's an author. She writes Regency romance, nonfiction, and paranormal, including a vampire novel. But I just write for fun. And I guess my question is for Mr. Chapman. In the past, I used to write short stories. I'm so busy now, I love the government that I work in. But I wrote horror, science fiction, dark fiction, a lot of that dark. For some reason, I fell in the dark around all the time. I don't know if it just takes a certain personality to do that. But I always brainstorm because it's come up with, I have very weird things sometimes. And for some reason, if I see something, it just stands out. So I was wondering if that was the same with you in coming up with your ideas.
I mean, more often than not, I look to the newspaper. I just read, I subscribe to 2 or 3 different publications, and I just read them. And, I have a file, and I clip, and it's my rainy day file. 1991, Zephyr Hills, Florida. A 79-year-old woman who held on to a rabid fox for 12 hours until help arrived has died. Like that's I look to truth, like the kind of historical events of the day, and I just kind of absorb it, and then I look for my way into that.
Can I interject one thing? My wife also she writes historicals. So, and when I heard you about research, one of her masters in library science, one was in history. So she writes a lot of the stuff has, she wrote Regency romance. They had to have research. So it just depends on really what type of writing you're doing.
Right.
Whether or not you really want to be.
Awesome. And we'll also be outside answering questions and discussing more and doing ways as well. So I'm going to try, we have 5 minutes left, I'm trying to get through 2, maybe 3, so we're just going to try and make your questions Kate. And then Ryan. Oh, yeah.
I have a story where you think you know how things are going, and all of a sudden there's a pivot, and it becomes something completely different. What do you guys think about switching genres, or doing, fairly radical changes in, like mid or late story?
So the genre pivots?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like that's fun. I mean, like, you make a pact with the writer, or I'm sorry, the reader, and, maybe by kind of subverting expectations, the reader will be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Sometimes it might be like, wait a minute, I signed up for a vampire story. Like, I think it depends. But I think drawing a line in the sand for your reader, there's nothing wrong with that. Some of them will cross the line, others might not, but that's, the ones who do cross it, readers are life.
Sounds good. I think I mentioned a few, and you had your hand raised over here. Did you just want to go? Yeah.
In regards to war, is there a ceiling for writing it and the amount of detail?
No, there's no ceiling. There's a whole splatterpunk genre. There's all sorts of, you can have everything from very slightly spooky to endless gore. It's all out there. There's a best for everything.
Awesome. And then I think, my war romance right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Quick question. I'm new to horror, but I'm also thinking have an opportunity to write something. What do you feel like to write your first horror story?
Terrifying.
It was great. It was like coming home. Because I did an MFA, tried many years to make myself into a literary writer because I was told that was like proper capital W writing. And the first time I sat down and just wrote something where everyone died at the end, it was like, it's such a relief. And I find it really satisfying, and that's why I do it.
I mean, if we're speaking honestly, the first horror story I ever wrote was the escape from an alien planet in first grade, and it was just a Critters ripoff for anyone who's seen the movie Critters. But in terms of the first story that I wrote, this felt like I was writing for the genre. It wasn't very scary. It wasn't blood and guts, monsters. It was basically a man loses his daughter at a rest stop and tries to find her. You realize that he's been there for actually 6 months, but you didn't know that until into the story. And that was terrifying for me. And I think the thing that's really exciting about horror is that it's a big umbrella. And so you can have horror comedy, you can have vampire romance, you can have all these different elements. And I think horror in more than any other genre, any other kind of form, allows for a kind of diversity of stories, a wealth of stories. And it might not be horrifying for everybody, but that's what makes it so special. I think it's for you, not for everybody, but it's for you, you find your niche within it.
Awesome. And we have time for one more question right there. And then also just a reminder, we'll be outside. If we didn't get to your question, you can ask us there. And we have tons to give away, so you'll probably still be able to grab something. Go ahead.
I went my way. With horror in the story, it's got to be oppressive. It needs to be omnipresent, sort of. Do you like to keep it literally breathing down the main character's necks, or do you like giving sort of breaks where it is sort of metaphorically breathing down their necks, and you're waiting for it to come back for it to even start at all?
I think it depends on the length of the story. I think you can have a short story, you can have that dancing down the neck the whole time. I think in a novel, you'll actually get reader fatigue, and it's also much harder to sustain that kind of tension. But then remember too, I think the heart in any story is actually in the point of view of the character. So it's whatever is frightening to them. So it depends on how scared they are by things, this person that you can create, how key they will become over the course of the story. But I think that kind of tension works much better in short length. I think at the beginning, as long as a novel, you need to give the readers a point where they can kind of breathe, and then hit them again with it.
Yeah, I think that at least with writing short stories, I think that it's like writing a song, where there's the song before you get to the chorus and the chorus. It's like you're designing something that has this kind of flow to it, and I don't know. And also, horror's very applicable to comedy where there's like, you're creating setup to punchline, and like there's very specific ways that you can tell a story that creates an attention and release. So I don't know. I think of comedy as a great kind of way in which to explore the dynamics of work.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's time for us, and so thank you so much for coming out. And to Fangoria for being so supportive. Guys, if you like the panel, then definitely try and tag us online. And also shout out to Fangoria for this, because they have really supported us a ton. So I will be outside for a bit along with our authors, the swag, if you have a question, or if you have a question, just come up and chat with us. So thank you so much.